Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hey there, welcome back to Unbound. I'm your host, Beth Curry. All right, so we're about to talk about something that absolutely blew my mind when I started noticing this pattern, and it's this. Mom can sometimes barely remember raising me and my sister. She forgets entire people existed. I talked about that in the last episode. She struggles with basic recent events. But if you mention my son, Crue, holy shit, she lights right up. Like, she remembers everything. Not vague recollections, but like really super specific details. Exact quotes, the number of times she hit her head on the cruise ship ceiling, the trajectory of newborn poop on her white blouse. Chapter 23 is called Through a Grandson's Eyes, and it's about this phenomenon where grandma memories are somehow more accessible and more vivid, more resilient than just about any other memories in her brain right now. There's neuroscience behind it. We'll talk about that. It's not just that she loves, her crew, though she does. It's about how those memories were formed and what emotions they're tied to, which parts of her brain are still functioning well enough to access them, right? So we'll talk about the grandmother advantage, the neuro reasons behind it, and kind of what it reveals about which memories survive dementia the longest. This is chapter 23 in the book, and it's called Through a Grandson's Eyes. There's something remarkable that happens when I share my son Crue's memories with Mom. A transformation occurs, sudden, unmistakable, and scientifically fascinating. Moments before, Mom struggled to recall events from her own children's accounts, but suddenly became animated, present, and fully engaged. Her eyes brighten, her posture straightens, and her recall becomes not just functional, but vivid and detailed. The first time I witnessed this phenomenon, I thought it might be coincidence, a particularly good day perhaps, or the simple joy of hearing about a beloved grandson. But the pattern has repeated itself consistently enough to suggest something more significant is at work in Mom's brain. "Let me tell you some things Crue remembers about you," I said during a recent visit after we'd spent nearly half an hour in the familiar dance of prompted memories and gentle redirection. Mom had been having a relatively foggy day, struggling to connect with a few other memories from Jennifer and Sandy's accounts that I'd shared in chapters before. But at the mention of Crue's name, her expression shifted subtly. "Crue," she repeated, the name itself seeming to activate something dormant. I began with his memory of being pulled over while she was driving home from school. Before I could even finish setting the scene, Mom was laughing. "Oh, I told that officer I was just an innocent old lady taking my young and impressionable grandson home." She delivered the line with perfect timing, close to how Crue had recounted it. "That's how you get out of a ticket," she added with a wink. That transported me back to the mother of my childhood, the one who had taught us that rules sometimes had creative interpretations. Exactly what Crue mentioned happened. The precision of this memory, not just the event but the exact wording, stood in stark contrast to her earlier struggles with recalling events from her adult children's accounts. When I shared Crue's memory of her somersaulting onto the bed in Orlando after taking a running start, she not only remembered but elaborated. "The beds were so high," she exclaimed. "I said to Crue, 'Watch this,' and took a running start from the doorway." She demonstrated with her hands the arc of her somersault. "Landed right in the middle." Crue thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. This additional detail, her "watch this" exclamation, wasn't part of Crue's account, but felt authentic, a piece of the memory that had survived intact in her mind when so many others had faded. Similarly, when I mentioned the cruise ship incident, she immediately touched the top of her head. "Every single morning," she said, wincing at the phantom pain. "The ceiling was so low, and I'd forgot until whack." She clapped her hands together and laughed at herself at the memory of that repeated mistake. Crue kept count. By the end of the cruise, it was up to 11 times. Again, this counting detail wasn't part of Crue's written memory of sharing a stateroom with Nana, but emerged from Mom with such clarity that I had no doubt of its accuracy. Something about these grandmother-grandson experiences remained accessible in ways that other memories were not. When I mentioned her slipping in the bathtub in Orlando, Mom covers her face in mock embarrassment. I went down like a ton of bricks. She lowered her voice. I wasn't hurt, but I made such a racket. Poor Crue probably thought his Nana had broken every bone. The car ride singing memory brought an immediate smile. We always sang in the car, she said. Crue would try to get me to stop, but I just sang louder. She hummed a few notes of what might have been one of her favorite driving songs. He pretended to be embarrassed, but he knew all the words too. Fascinated by this dramatic difference in recall, I began researching the neurological and psychological factors that might explain it. What I discovered offers intriguing insights into how memory functions in those experiencing cognitive decline. Dr. Lisa Geneva, a neuroscientist and author specializing in neurological diseases, explains that emotional memories are processed and stored differently than factual ones. The amygdala, which processes emotion, can remain relatively preserved even when the hippocampus, responsible for storing and retrieving explicit memories, has been compromised by dementia. Memories formed with strong emotional connections tend to be more resilient, often surviving when more mundane recollections have faded. Grandparent-grandchild relationships typically form during what psychologists and introduced by psychologist Erik Erikson call the generativity stage of life, a period when adults derive meaning from guiding younger generations. These relationships often involve less discipline and responsibility than a parent-child dynamic, allowing for more playfulness, spontaneity, and joy. The memories formed during these interactions are frequently saturated with positive emotions, giving them a neurological advantage in terms of retention. There's also the matter of timing. Many of Mom's experiences with Crue occurred more recently than her memories of raising her own children. Since dementia typically affects older memories less severely than recent ones, this temporal factor might seem counterintuitive. However, it has been pointed out that the emotional intensity of an experience can sometimes override the temporal disadvantage, allowing newer but emotionally significant memories to persist when other memories have disappeared. Additionally, research on reminiscence therapy has shown that memories involving identity-affirming roles, like being a beloved, fun-loving grandmother, may be more accessible than memories of more complex, sometimes conflicted roles like parenthood. The grandmother role often allows for a purer expression of nurturing without the complicated dynamics of primary parenting. This selective memory preservation isn't merely academic. It offers practical insights for those interacting with loved ones experiencing memory loss. By focusing conversations on emotionally rich experiences, particularly those involving relationships where joy and playfulness predominated over duty and responsibility, we might tap into more resilient neural pathways. For me, witnessing Mom's dramatic shift when discussing Crue has been both heartening and bittersweet. There's joy in seeing her fully present, accessing memories with confidence and pleasure, yet there's also the awareness that other equally important memories of raising her children, of her marriage, of her career, might not benefit from the same neurological advantages. Still, there's wisdom in following the path of least resistance, in gravitating toward the memories that remain most accessible. These moments of connection, however selective they might be, are precious windows into the woman who remains beneath the cognitive changes. Below are Crue's memories of his Nana Banana, shared in his own words. They represent a unique perspective on Mom, the playful, sometimes mischievous grandmother who created memories that have proven remarkably resilient, even as other recollections begin to fade. Memories of My Nana by Beth Curry. She got pulled over. I don't remember the reason, and she said to the cop, "I'm just a sweet old lady taking my grandson home from school." And then the cop said she's free to go. She then proceeded to laugh afterwards and told me that's how you get out of a ticket. In Orlando, she would somersault onto the bed and had a running start. On the cruise ship, she bumped her head, getting up out of bed every morning because of the small room. In Orlando, she slipped in the bathtub and we all heard a huge crash. She was constantly singing on long car rides. After exploring Crue's memories, I was curious to see what moments stood out most vividly in Mom's own recollections of her grandson. Her face softened with a different kind of warmth when I asked her to share her favorite memories of Crue. "I loved when he would sleep over at our house," she said without hesitation. "Those nights were special." She described their routine in surprising detail, how they would make popcorn and watch movies, the specific way she would tuck him in, the stuffed animals he always brought with him. He'd always ask for just one more story, just like you did at that age, she added with a smile. "What about when he was really little?" I prompted. Mom laughed suddenly. Oh, when he was a newborn, just a tiny baby, he got me good. Her eyes crinkled with amusement at the memory. I was holding him wearing my nice white blouse, brand new couch, too. She shook her head. That little boy somehow managed to, well, it was like a spray. She gestured expressively, indicating the trajectory. All up my blouse, all over the new couch. I'd never seen poop like that. The detail of this memory, the white blouse, the new couch, the surprising physics of newborn elimination, suggested this had made quite an impression, preserved with remarkable clarity, while so many other memories had faded. You and Dad took him golfing a lot, didn't you? I asked, thinking of mini golf trips. Oh, yes, Mom nodded eagerly. He loved going real golfing with his grandpa. This nickname, Crue's special term for his grandfather, brought another smile to her face. They had their own little world out there on the golf course. Your dad was so patient with him, teaching him how to hold the clubs just right. Her expression clouded slightly. There was one time, though, she began, with her voice taking on a more somber tone. Crue was just a little thing, just a few months old. I was sitting in the chair by the wall at the church, lifting him up above my head. He loved that, being lifted up high, and She demonstrated the motion, then winced. I misjudged the space, smacked his little head right into the wall behind me. She pressed her hand to her heart at the memory. I felt terrible, just awful. He cried, and I couldn't stop apologizing, checking his head for bumps. The emotion in her voice was so present, so immediate, it was as if this had happened recently rather than many years ago. He was fine, I reassured her. Kids are resilient. I know, she nodded. But a Nana isn't supposed to bonk her grandson's head into walls. Then she smiled ruefully, though I suppose it's better than him bonking his head on the cruise ship every morning. I found it interesting how during this visit she was able to recall that memory perfectly fine on her own, when other times she had no recollection of it when we would talk about it. This ability to connect different memories across time, linking her own mishap with cruise ship story, revealed a coherence to her thinking that sometimes seemed absent in other contexts. Where recent events often existed as isolated islands in her mind, unconnected to broader narratives, these grandmother memories formed a bridge of association connecting different moments across years. As I reflect on these memories and Mom's vivid recall of them, I'm struck by how they reveal dimensions of her personality that might not be as apparent in other contexts. This playful, uninhibited woman represents a part of Mom that emerged perhaps most freely in her relationship with Crue. There's a special quality to grandparent-grandchild relationships that can allow both parties to express themselves differently than they might with others. Freed from the primary responsibilities of parenting, grandparents often discover a more lighthearted approach to intergenerational connections. And for grandchildren, these relationships can provide a unique form of acceptance and fun that differs from what they experience with parents. What I find most moving about Mom's responses to Crue's memories is how they suggest that beneath the cognitive changes, core aspects of her personality, her humor, her playfulness, her slight rebellious streak, remain intact. In some ways, Mom's relationship with Crue may have allowed her to express parts of herself that were always present but perhaps constrained by other roles and responsibilities. The Nana who took running starts to somersault onto hotel beds might not be so different from the young woman she once was before the layers of adult responsibility accumulated. Psychologists suggest that such continuity of personality, even amid cognitive decline, offers an important reminder. Dementia changes memory and cognitive function, but the essential person, with their core values, sense of humor, and emotional patterns, those stick around. For Crue, these memories represent delightful moments with a grandmother who made ordinary experiences extraordinary. For Mom, they seem to function as anchors to her sense of self, accessible touch points that connect her to who she has been and continues to be. And for me, observing her joyful recall of these moments provides a kind of comfort, evidence that while much has changed, she's still present, still herself in ways that truly matter. All right, so let me paint you the picture of how this works in real time because it's freaking remarkable. So I'll be sitting with my mom trying to get her to remember something from when I was a kid, maybe a vacation we took or something that happened at home, and she's struggling and she's confused and frustrated and the fog is really thick and we're getting nowhere. But then I say, let me tell you what Crue remembers about you. And it's like someone flipped a switch, like her posture changes and her eyes open and brighten and she's suddenly there in a way that she wasn't 30 seconds ago. Um, I mentioned the time she got pulled over, and, before I could finish the story, she's laughing and quoting herself, like word for word, the same thing Crue remembered her saying. And then, she added that's how you get out of a ticket part. And I'm thinking, like, you couldn't remember what you had for breakfast this morning when I asked you if you ate and what you ate. And you can recall, like, the exact phrasing of a conversation with a cop from, like, 10 years ago. Like, what? Um, Another example, Crue told me about the time she took a running start. Now, I remember her doing that sometimes, but, like, I wasn't always there. But the way that she just elaborated on it, adding details that Crue didn't include. It's not vague recall, it's vivid memory, Every memory that he shared, that pattern was kind of there. So, woot the fook is going on here. Like, why are these memories so much more accessible than everything else? Science. It's fascinating, Dr. Lisa Geneva, who explained the emotional memories and processed and stored differently than factual ones, the amygdala, blah, 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 all that stuff. They tend to be more resilient. I've talked about it and I will continue to talk about it. They survive longer. And grandparent and grandchild relationships are like so totally saturated with positive emotion. Right? There's less discipline and responsibility and give them all the chocolate and less of the heavy shit that comes with actual parenting. And it's mostly just play and fun and spontaneity and all that good stuff. So every memory my mom has with Crue is kind of tied to laughter or surprise or delight. And there's no complicated emotional baggage. And there's no teenager slamming doors or toddler tantrums that she had to manage alone, right? Like, it's just pure uncomplicated enjoyment. That's it. These positive emotions, I think, act like preservatives for the memories. Like, I'm sure this is what's got to be it. They protect them in ways that more neutral or complex memories don't get protected, I think, Adults, deriving meaning from guiding younger generations and grandparenting, happens during this stage. And, when people are actively seeking ways to pass on wisdom, create legacy, they feel relevant to the next generation. So these memories formed during this grandparenting aren't just emotionally positive. They're also identity affirming, if that makes sense. They reinforce a role that feels good, that connects to purpose and meaning. When you compare that to the memories of raising your own kids, like, those are complicated memories, mixed emotions and exhaustion alongside love and frustration mixed with pride and duty and responsibility and worry and guilt and all that heavy parenting shit that makes all those memories more complex and harder to preserve cleanly. So grandmother memories are simpler. They're more pure, and that simplicity makes them more accessible when the brain starts breaking down. When I asked my mom what she remembered most about Crue, and she immediately went to the sleepovers, the way that she would tuck him in, the stuffed animals that he would bring, and then laughing and talking about the poop. That memory right there is decades old because, like, it's 20 years. It's when he was an infant, like newborn. But she tells it with this perfect clarity because it was hilarious and surprising and mortifying all at once. It's peak emotional content. But sometimes she can't remember she's got, like, 2 daughters. Again, so this tells us emotion matters more than importance, right? Just keeps going back to that. It just seems like we just keep going back to the feeling over the importance. Yeah. So when my mom talks about Crue, she connects different memories across time in ways that she can't do with other topics. That coherent thinking, that ability to see patterns and connections across memories, it's absent when she's trying to recall other things. But grandmother memories, like, form this, I guess it's like a connected web of sorts, right? Yeah. And that, I think, helps preserve them further. So, yeah. Is it fair? Again, I gotta ask, like, is it fair that mom sometimes doesn't remember my sister or I, but she seems to always remember Crue? yes and no. Like, fairness isn't really the point, right? Like I said before, dementia doesn't really operate on fairness. It's neurology, mostly, primarily, and clearly emotional. It's emotion, and it's timing and factors that we just don't really understand. So grandma memories aren't more important than other memories. They're just more accessible. Beating myself up about why she remembers some things and others doesn't change a damn thing. So I just use this knowledge strategically. When I want to connect with mom, if I want to see her light up, I know one reliable way to get there is to talk about Crue. Am I using Crue as a tool then? Maybe, but it kind of gives us both moments of genuine connection and joy. So I'm pretty okay with that. Fine by me. Yeah. So I think what I'm taking away from all of this, and hoping that you do too, if you're dealing with someone who has dementia, pay attention to what memories they access more readily, more easily. Pay attention to which relationships seem to bypass that fogginess more consistently. For my mom, it seems to be Crue. For your person, it might be their own grandkids or a niece or a nephew or a friend that they made later in life, even a pet. Like, it could be a pet too. Whoever or whatever it is, that's your access point. So that's where the clearest connection still lives. And don't feel guilty about leaning into these easier pathways either. Like, don't feel like you're somehow betraying other relationships by focusing on the ones that work best. You're not playing favorites either. You're just kind of following the pathways that are still intact in the old brain there. Grandmother memories, my mom has, aren't better than her memories of raising Jen and I. They're not more valuable. They're not more meaningful. They're just more preserved, right? So in the landscape of dementia, preservation, everything. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for something in her brain is kind of working well enough to hold on to these moments, and that she can still access joy and playfulness. And that mischievous streak that made her tell that cop that she was just an innocent old lady. Oh my goodness. Underneath all that confusion and loss, that woman is still there, she's still there. And as long as I can access her through Crue's memories or through Crue or mentioning Crue, I'm going to keep doing it, because those moments of clarity, however they come, they're worth everything to me. That's it. Thanks for listening to Unbound. Support and contact info are in the show notes. As always, please join the Facebook group for discussion, and I will see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.